Welcome to the Basecamp Community Podcast, hosted by your head coaches, Tim Cusick and me, Namrita Brooke. We discuss timely topics that you can apply to get the most out of your training and learn to perform at your best. I am Namrita Brooke, Basecamp coach and sports nutritionist. I've been coaching for 18 years. I have a PhD in applied exercise physiology, a master's in sports nutrition, and I'm also a registered dietitian.
My name is Tim Cusick. I'm the other head coach here at Basecamp. I've been coaching for over 20 years. I've had the luxury of coaching numerous athletes to world and national titles and to the Olympics.
Welcome back. So today we are talking about a I think it's a really interesting conversation. We're going to take a new take on a common topic that we have actually covered before, and it's on the aging athlete, master's athlete, or however you want to call it or define it, 50 plus, 60 plus. But we're going to take a different angle on it. So something we were chatting about and I fully admit going into this, like I'm guilty of this as well, but how many times have you been on a ride and someone said, well, this used to not be an issue. I used to be able to do this, but I used to be able to hang, but now I can't because, it's my age. I'm getting older. I'm 50. Ever since I turned 50, I can't climb as well or recover as well, XYZ. And we associate many of these things, these changes, these negative um, feelings or observations to our age. So we're going to talk about this today, but also it might be slightly uncomfortable because our goal is to really have the listeners come away with something new. Like we want to have them change their outlook on aging, or what does it mean to be a training athlete? We hear of athletes who are maybe they've raced for a long time and they were focused on performance, and now they're like, well, I can't do that anymore. So I'm going to focus on exercise for longevity. Well, we're going to talk about why it doesn't need to be either or and why age shouldn't necessarily be a convenient excuse. Um,
You know,
yeah,
the way I would summarize it, we're going to push back a little.
yeah.
So there is a waiver attached to this podcast. By listening, you are signing the waiver. We're going to push back a little bit, not in the sense of right or wrong, but maybe in the sense where the topic and the dialogue of training at 50 plus or the maturing athlete has become very fitted into the bell curve, the way I like to discuss it. And the problem is, as we age, there's impacts on that bell curve. And we actually have more variations between performing athletes at 50 plus than we do at 49 and under. Again, not an exact line. So we're going to push back and try to help you walk away with a different perspective and some key elements of things for you to consider and then consider executing. Some of these are going to raise an eyebrow or two. I'm going to confess right now, we're going to go there and push back against some of the perception of the norms, not necessarily the norms, but the way they're interpreted in the overall view of the 50 plus athlete. I'm going to give a caveat for me just to know because we get this pushback. I've done one or two good educational webinars in 50 plus athletes and have spoken on the topic before. I am a 50 plus athlete. I am 59, going on 60. I am going through this as we are experiencing it. So not only am I on the research as a coach, I'm on the research as a maturing athlete, and I'm also one of those people who does a lot of experimenting on myself. So I've messed this up enough to really come away with some good insights, but that's how we learn. So I'm excited to dive in today. It means a lot to me by aging, being an aging athlete. So
Well,
let's jump right in.
yeah, I mean, so we're all getting older, right? And it is when we look at our target market from, the coaching population, we're all getting older and it's we see these changes. And again, in a previous podcast, we have covered that aging does have some real physiological implications, such as VO2 max, anabolic resistance, et cetera. And we're not going to cover all those things again, but instead of focusing on those, let's focus on thinking about it differently. So, what are the things before we count ourselves out that we can be more proactive in focusing on? So, over the years, have you changed things in your diet, in your strength training, in your recovery routine, in your training? We are going to think about age and something called training age. So, why don't you explain the difference between those two?
So age and training age is your biological age. Like I am 59. There's my age. But training age in its simplest format is the number of years I've been training under a reasonably consistent application of structure.
Mhm.
Like to me, that's the best and simplest way to say training age. Training age is kind of has two elements to it. And it's funny in so much of exercise and endurance training, you're thinking about this. There's an acute training age, what I've been doing, and this is my exact definition, what I've been doing in the last 18 months, and then a chronic training age, what I've been doing in 18 months plus. Because sometimes we take longer extended times off as we get older. That has a bigger impact on your training age and what you should do than when you're younger, but there's more on that later. I do want to start out with a quick story of why this is so important for the 50 plus to think about. And I learned this from Dr. Andy Coggan. We were developing the Power Profile version 8 for WKO5, and him and I were working on this together. And we were talking about, we had so many requests from the WKO users. They wanted a 50 plus power profile, where the one that's in Training Peaks and WKO is universal, which is generally younger athletes, I can tell you right now. Um, and Andy would not do it for the exact right reason. His point was is that as we get close to 50 and older, the variations are much higher. And those, like the range of variation. Yeah, if you round all those numbers into a bell curve, it would form sort of a bell, but it's a very flat and wide bell curve. And if we tried to do a power profile, it would be like throwing darts. I shouldn't say that. And he felt it just wouldn't hold up to a rigorous view of accuracy. And he's absolutely right. So the dialogue we consistently had of what impacts that, what were you doing the 10 years, the 20 years before? How did you lead into 50 plus has the biggest impact on how you would fit in that profile. I mean, you have genetics and other things, don't get me wrong, but it becomes the biggest factor of how you fit onto that profile. So when we start to have this concept and discussion of training age and how we should act, we need to think about it in this concept. And I'll do this quick, and I'd love to get everybody's opinion. It's like retirement investing.
Mhm.
And this is why people who are 20 years old and 30 years old should listen to this podcast. Because the earlier you start investing in your retirement and the better quality investments you make, the more you're going to enjoy your retirement. When you're thinking about the 50 plus athlete, that's a reality. The problem is you may be listening to this podcast because you're 55 and you have the investments you made in the 20s, 30s, and 40s are already in the bank. So that being said, how can we maximize what we have in the bank? How can we maximize what we've already invested? Some of you might have done it great and you're going to profile higher, better, stronger. Some of you might not have done it very well at all. You might actually have more room to grow. There's a lot going on here that you can't easily pigeonhole the 50 plus rider.
Yeah. And I think, we'll talk about this too. If you're looking for information and you're, either going to the internet and listening to podcasts or even looking at research papers, you just don't know that that specific research is going to apply to you. There's just way too many variables. And this makes me think of, I've done a couple of talks to women's cycling groups and, general women's menopause groups. And this concept of, there's this narrative out there with menopause and with aging, and specifically for women, that it's all doom and gloom. But, I try to have women understand that, one, it's not too late to start, but also the habits that you've developed over the last, like you said, 10 to 20 years really impact how you're going to go through this next stage of your life when you're training. So, what has your strength training history been? What's your endurance training history been? Your consistency, the type of training, intensity, endurance, volume. And what has your diet been like? Have you been over restrictive in your diet and your fueling and gone through long periods of calorie restriction or low energy availability? That impacts your physiology. But if you've generally done okay at these things and had long periods in your life where you have prioritized training and strength and nutrition, um, you're set up, you're in a kind of a different spot now. And so it is not all doom and gloom. And then on the flip side, if you do have a history of that, knowing where to start now to pick up where it's not too late, but maybe the same training plan that works, for your friend or your teammate may not be the same thing that works for you. And maybe your areas that you need to focus on are slightly different. So individualization is always important for athletes, but at this stage, I think it's I mean, you can't not individualize, right?
Couldn't agree more. So I'm going to give pushback number one. Maybe we'll number my pushbacks, like our pushbacks. I know we generally agree here. Pushback number one. Whenever I listen to an aging podcast, and I've said it in a general format for fear of people interpreting it wrong. So I'm pulling back the fear here. Um, the first answer you get is we universally say, oh, well, masters riders, 50 plus riders just need more recovery.
Mhm.
Like that's what you need, more recovery. Like that's the universal statement number one when you talk about 50 plus athletes. That may or may not be, well, that's true. Let me rephrase that. That's true in general. You might, but it's not an absolute truth. Those are two different things because it really, again, depends on what you were doing before. So we tend to think of that concept like aging requires more rest. And that's a good starting concept. But let me change that paradigm a little bit because your history impacts that, right? So aging magnifies your training history. So the older we get, the higher your acute and chronic training history impacts where you're at today. And that's important to understand because when you're making decisions about intensity and volume distribution or training rhythm and modalities or training plans and programs, you as a 50 plus rider, it's more important that your training history, acute and chronic, is taking into effect there versus maybe one that's 20 or 25 or even 30 because your history magnifies your individual needs, the impact, the range of where you fit in this continuum. And we tend to think, and this is a breakthrough point for everybody, we tend to often see the older athlete as they become more and more alike. Like we all get older, right? We all slow down and we're all less energetic or invigorated. We're less capable of something, something, something. That's kind of bullshit. I got news for everybody. It's we're actually more unique as we age. There's more variation because we're more impacted by that training history, that runway into being a 50 plus athlete, where you actually need more precise individualism, more precision in the analysis of your training program plan, modality, rhythm, intensity distribution, all the things we talk about. You're not growing more alike. Like if you put all 50 plus of us together, we're not growing more alike. The numbers aren't getting closer and closer in a cluster. The cluster is expanding because of that impact. And the simplest example to close that pushback is if you took 130-year-old athletes and 155-year-old athletes and give them the same training program, the 30-year-olds would generally fit within the same response. Don't get me wrong, execution, life stress, sleep, there's other impacts, but it's going to be a range. And that range might be, I'm doing it on the camera, this big, a small circle in the big picture of the world. At 55 plus, that circle is much bigger. You're going to see much bigger variation because even implementing the same exact plan, you're going to see more variation and different results, but more importantly, more variation in that 55 athlete study group. because what you were doing both acutely and chronic training the last 18 months and the last 10, 20, 30 years are what's driving that variation. It's so important that you have a thought process like that when you're planning your training strategy.
Yeah, that gives me actually three things I picked up on in there. So one, if we're not just looking at more recovery, I think type of recovery is pretty essential. Type and timing, right, of the recovery. Over resting and taking too much actual rest, whether it's 2+ rest days a week or complete rest instead of active recovery or other movement, is not necessarily the best thing for every 50+ athlete. Another thought I had listening to that was maybe if you're struggling with this whole concept of like, oh, I'm getting older, I'm not as fast as, this at this type of effort as I used to be, maybe leaning into your strengths at this point and signing up for events that play to your strengths while also spending extra time to focus on those aging related limiters, maybe, or whatever we want to call them, can unlock a new level of, performance and excitement for you if you're listening to this. The other thing I was thinking of is we tend to talk a lot about the integration of training with strength and nutrition and this whole like performance ecosystem, on our podcast, but I think it's even that much more important. And we, had Manaka Brody on our podcast and talked about this as well. But if you are listening to this and thinking, okay, well, maybe I'm just not doing something as well as I could. Also think about how well are you not just paying attention to your nutrition and your calorie intake and your fueling and your timing or your strength training, but how well are you integrating it and putting it together? Because that is one of the biggest areas for improvement I see with older athletes is like, okay, yeah, they know something has changed in the way they oxidize fuel or the amount of calories they need or the amount of protein they need or whatever. But like putting it together is really what makes the difference.
It's so important what you just said. So, listeners, make sure you hear this. You're talking about like this multifaceted approach, 360-degree approach towards training. And if you want to maximize training performance, and as we get 50 plus, also add to that quality of life, longevity, like add those parts into your thinking. That multifaceted approach is so important. But yet, go back to what I originally said. So much of the discussion, I shouldn't say all, so much of the discussion is the bell curve.
Mhm.
Like the bell curve does not define the 50 plus athlete. You must find your place in that curve and understand that your needs are more individualized than the younger athlete, than let's just say the age younger athlete. You have to be, if those are your goals, like you want to continue to improve or protect as much performance as possible, improve your longevity, improve your quality of life, the answer is in more individualization, not just accepting I'm getting older and slower. That's why you shouldn't think that way. Namrita's point earlier, the introduction, you hear that a lot. Don't think that. Think about where I fit in that bell curve and how do I compartmentalize something we're going to talk about in a little bit. That individualization and solution on how I better operate as an individual or operate, how I better train and live as an individual.
Yeah. So before we move on to that, just one additional point where physiology, is changing, but want to emphasize the fact that the areas of decline are, and the rate of decline is not necessarily guaranteed. And so there is this protective effect and of endurance training, of strength training, of proper fueling and the integration of the three. And how you respond to that is also very individual. So I think if you've arrived at this point and realized that, okay, maybe I haven't been doing some of these things, well, how do we go forward? How do we compartmentalize, I guess, just thinking of like aging versus, okay, I've detrained in this specific area because I haven't done any intensity and I haven't done strength training for the last 2 years. So how do we think about that and then move forward with that idea of compartmentalizing things.
Let's say this first, right? I think what a great lead in. This is going to be perfect in this idea. What does happen as we age? And you're actually more qualified to explain this than me, but I'll just give two or three concepts. Like, where are we most challenged? I don't want to just go say loss. What do we lose? That's easy to then to just fall into the bell curve. Um, I'll put these in order, but everybody has individualists. One, we lose VO2 max. We do know that the natural order is that as we age, we'll lose VO2 max. So we just have decreased cardiorespiratory capability, reduce shifts in ways that we oxidize fuels. We have a reduction in recovery rate. I mean, these impacts of how we're dealing with VO2 is maximum amount of oxygen you can intake and uptake at the molecular level during harder, intense exercise. That changes and declines, but that can be highly impacted with exercise and other effects. We lose muscle mass. And I'm saying that as a generalization. There's actually more specificity under there. But let's just say we lose muscle mass. We just become less muscular in nature as we need. We're losing some of that, particularly lean muscle mass, which is important to our overall quality of life and health. We do have some aerobic capacity decline, but that's probably where some of the gray areas come about with people. So, in the loss of aerobic capacity, I don't think that's guaranteed. Maybe, Nemrita, you could talk a little bit more about that. Like, why can't we just say as we get older, we lose aerobic capacity?
Yeah, because your muscle mass and the makeup of your muscle mass really makes a difference. And so it's we have different types of fiber. So as we get older, there can be, if you just look at the literature and aging muscle, there can be a shift in oxidative to glycolytic. So muscle fibers can get more reliant on carbohydrate for fuel. So that makes us think, wow, well, my endurance and my VO2 max is not going to be as good anymore, or my aerobic capacity is not going to be as good. But I think looking again at your training age and the specific makeup of your fibers and your fiber types and your current training all make a difference there. So you can, I think it's encouraging for people to hear that you can still build mitochondria as you get older. So, the protein intake and the strength training is one thing, but also what are you doing with that muscle once you've been able to put it on as you're training? Like all those protocols, the training intensity distribution, the volume, the fueling, all of that makes a difference in how you're able to use that muscle and improve mitochondrial density and function. And when we think of, VO2 max and being able to function at a higher percentage of that, that is all, it's all related. And so you want to think about maintaining some intensity, as we know, because we have to keep that ceiling, we have to have that stimulus. You also want to keep the aerobic volume. And without those two, then yeah, we might see more targeted declines in certain areas, again, depending on your phenotype and your training age and all of those variables. But yeah, it's not all doom and gloom, and you can continue to have the same adaptations as your younger self or as younger athletes. It's the key is in the training volume and intensity, I think.
Yeah, so let's summarize this. So we talk about VO2 max. We know there's a natural decline in VO2 max, but most listeners here will know, and I kind of said it, we can defend against that with the right types of training and stimuli. So we can slow that, if not even stop that for large chunks of time. Depends on your training history again and your training and your athletic maturity. We talk about aerobic capacity. We can actually continue to grow mitochondria and improve in those spaces as we age. And the third one I mentioned early was this muscular strength or the loss of muscle mass and the loss of strength. We're actually declining The natural trajectory is decline in strength and coordination. So it's not just strength, it's actually strength, stability, and coordination. Those are the three things you want to maintain. Um, those can be acted against with strength training. Ta-da! Right? So it's funny when we relook at the things that negatively impact us, we already know we can act against them. And probably most people just listen to the last 5 minutes and say, yeah, I generally get that idea. Maybe you didn't know about aerobic capacity, but you get this concept of what we're talking about. So now I'm going to give you pushback number two. You need to separate impacts of aging from the concept of detraining. Before we blame age, ask yourself, what else am I changing? What else is changing? Because the problem is the blame game of aging often fits us, helps us fit ourselves into the bell curve and kind of go quietly into the night. Um, we're not that way. So we're pushing back the other way. So when we think about this concept of before you say it's just aging or I'm just getting old or you're in that race or you're in your group ride and you're like, wow, I am 60 years old. I can't keep up anymore. Think about what you're doing. Analyze your acute training, particularly, right? Your acute training maturity, particularly your last 18 months, and then how that sits on top your chronic training maturity. The key mistake is, and when you analyze that, you probably gave up something else in
Mhm.
aging. One of the things I said, and I regret saying it because I can't not think about it all the time, aging is a journey into comfort. Like one of the things your brain wants you to do in certain ways in its defensiveness is to slow down, to seek comfort. Excellent performance endurance training is a world of discomfort. Not always, it's not like it hurts every day, but it certainly has its moments, as we know. So you have these battling subconscious and at times conscious. Your natural desire is to seek more comfort and slow down a little. It's wired into you a little. And the training you, the athlete in you is saying, no, I can't. And we often make some behavioral changes in there we don't quite notice. So look back and say, what did I change? Did I stop or never start strength training? Did I remove high intensity training or maybe went too much to high intensity training? Here's a sticky one. Did I gain weight and lose lean muscle mass? Now, I never like to go in the weight division because you're never going to diet your way into being a healthy athlete. But as we get 50 plus, that battle becomes a little harder and we have to think about it. And then another thing in 50 plus, and I think this is my opinion based on some science, one of the things that can impact the female athlete even more has your sleep patterns chronically changed. Not like I get a bad night of sleep here or there. Our sleep patterns change as we age. Those are things you want to ask yourself instead of just saying, I'm just getting older. Look back at those in 0 to 18 months and then 18 months to 10 years. Look for possible concepts of detraining, and detraining can also be considered under adapting. Your sleep pattern change, less quality sleep will lead you to under adapt to stimuli. So target change. What else could it be? Eliminate everything else before you say it's aging, because I will guarantee for 90% of you, it's going to be you're going to find the answers in everything else that will help you defend against aging in an individual way better than you thought possible.
It makes me think about, and I think we've said this before, but like when you're younger, you can kind of get away with doing the bare minimum or get away with not doing things and still performing pretty well and recovering pretty well. But as you get older, those other accessory habits are not necessarily accessory anymore. They're foundational. And if you're not doing them, like sleep and giving yourself the best chance to have a good night's sleep, that's really going to harm you as you're getting older, especially if you're trying to still pursue um, training for performance. Um, one thing you said about, we may not like the feeling of discomfort or, it's hard. So if you're doing, like, say, 3-minute VO2 max efforts, maybe some of the people listening, it's not that they're afraid of the discomfort or they don't like the pain. Maybe they do, but they don't like the numbers that they're seeing that go along with it. So I think if you've avoided doing things for a while, like intensity or strength training, and now you're realizing, okay, maybe I do need to emphasize that in my training program again, you know, put the numbers aside and focus on the effort and the consistency in that, right?
Couldn't agree more. Because pain could, that discomfort comes physiologically, psychologically, um, recovery, like how you feel the rest of the day. But it's like, and this is a decision we all make. Because we're talking about performance, a performing athlete, a performance, training approach. To me, as long as we don't go too far in the performance training approach, and that is an important subject to come back to in the end, we are improving quality of life and longevity of life. That trifecta, for me, is worth the investment of a little higher discipline, a little more individualization, a little better focus. Because I do naturally enjoy it. So maybe it's easy for me, and there's some people who don't enjoy it as much. It's harder for them. But that doesn't change that reality is true. If we do these things right, it's not just we're making a better performing athlete, we're improving quality of life and longevity, we're accomplishing multiple goals that we all do kind of want. But I will tell you, just like everything, there's nothing for free. It takes some investment. So let's talk about this idea. Where does that investment start? Go back to this idea of investing and building, right? What is the importance of this training age we're talking about and how to determine? Well, I gave you the definition. Consistent, and consistent is such an important word. Structured training, acute 18 months or less, chronic beyond that, right? And really 18 months to 10 years. If we think about how that impacts you, let's just start big picture. Somebody new with a very young, maybe their training age is 6 months, they actually still have a lot of room to grow, even at 55, 60. They've not trained, they've tapped into nothing. They're going to have some room, and they have an encouraging runway in front of them. Somebody with a very high training age, they still have runway. The goals might not be 10, 20% improvement or some number. The goals might be preservation. The goals might be performance orientated. You're still doing events and finding ways to perform well against competitive sets, age groups, and things like that. But there is an excellent answer for both when we think about how do I really maximize this now? How do I use my training age? So, all right, everybody, take out your pencil or pen and pencil. See how I'm showing I'm going to be 60.
No problem.
I'm not even sure pencils, they make pencils anymore. So, you need to compartmentalize your training age. Do this as a little exercise. Write down the areas I'm about to say and think about like how many of the last 18 months and how many of the last 10 years have you focused on doing these things right? And give yourself a scale of 1 to 10, like 10 being great, 1 being poor. See how it plays out. 1, training age, the category number 1, your aerobic age, years of consistent aerobic endurance development. A lot of people will do well there. People who ride bikes tend to like to ride their bikes, and we get as much in as we can. 2, your intensity age. Your intensity age, what's been your history experience of performing structured work above threshold? Threshold and above, like harder efforts. And you can define that with a pretty broad stroke, but you get my point. 3, your strength age. How many years have you participated in a quality, structured strength training program? And a strength training program that works, I don't want to say cycling specific, but is movement specific, stability specific, and literally work towards the maintenance of injury free lean muscle mass. Next one, a surprising one, I'm going to put this next, technical age. Like, we don't give enough credit to this as an aging performing athlete. What are your skills? Can you pace? Pacing changes as we get older, and you actually can get better at it or not. We've gone both ways. I've done both. But the skill, the pacing, how efficient you can be, how economical, things like that, your technical age, rate that. And finally, the one that we tend to go right to in our daily thinking of what's the best advice for the aging athlete? What is your recovery age? This is tricky though, and I want you to actually think this one out. What's your accumulated injuries and blocks of time off due to injury? I have seen wide variations of this in masters athletes. I've seen the masters athlete who gets injured every 6 months and has to take 2 months off. Some of that is self inflicted. Some of that's just part of getting older. Sometimes things happen, but we need to minimize. Like, that's a recovery age. If you're looking back at your acute and chronic training history and you're once a year taking 3 months off because of injury, you have a low number. That's a low recovery age score. You haven't done well at the recovery. Now, it might not be your fault. None of this is, don't play the blame game. But remember, that's compartmentalize your training age, your training maturity in these fields: aerobic age, intensity age, strength age, technical age, and recovery age. Start your mentality by breaking those five down and analyze that as your acute. What have you been doing the last 18 months? How well have you done in those? And your chronic, let's say the last 10 years. If you start in that simple self assessment, you're going to learn a lot.
So, okay, I think that's a lot to think about, and I think that we're going to have a variety of answers from people. So what do we do with that information? So we want to change the way that we are approaching training in general. So if we have, let's say, um, a high training age, but maybe the last 18 months we've realized our training hasn't really been that great. We've kind of fallen into what's more comfortable, and we've decided that, oh, I get, too injured from doing strength training, so I stopped doing that. So how do we turn things around then?
Great question. So let's say you did, and again, I'm doing this for those of you following us on our YouTube channel. Let's say you took those five areas and you
Mhm.
built a little bar graph, and the higher the bar, the better you are, on a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, the better you are. And you put aerobic age, intensity, strength, technical, and recovery age. Let's say your strength age is a 2 because you haven't been strength training. We see this probably most frequently of that group. Um, Fixed. And maybe then the next low age is you started to give up intensity, and that one's a 4. Fix the lowest ones first in a correct way that don't create losses in the other compartments. So if I jump right into strength training and I'm like, I haven't been strength training, you're right, Tim, I gave myself a 1. And you literally leave this podcast, run to the gym, put 250 pounds on a deadlift bar, lift it once, hurt your back, and you're out for 6 months. Yeah, you missed the point. Like, that's what we don't want. We need you to build on that, right?
Well, hopefully with
So,
age comes wisdom too, right?
yes, wow, correct. We should have a wisdom age rating. Everybody add that as number 6 off to the side. Great point. Um, we need to do it in a way that fixes the lowest, the limiter, the weakest point in your 5 compartments without hurting the others. So if strength is your lowest, you're going to have to sit down and have an honest conversation with yourself and say, if I want to improve as a master's athlete, as a maturing athlete, and I want to have better quality of life and longevity, I'm going to have to commit to some strength training. I truly believe that's one of the key elements you just got to commit to and do and find the time. Even if it takes a little time of your away from you on the bike and this and that, you will be better as the whole athlete. So fix the bottom stuff first. The lowest scores you gave yourself, start there. Don't reinvent your training. You don't need super new workouts or intervals or this other thing. Fix the problems that you have. This is a Deming concept of business. You fix the lower problems, fix your strength problem, and you might find your everything raises, everything gets better. And the problem you thought, which was your second lowest problem, might fix itself sort of, because the biggest problem you have, strength training in my example, suddenly you start strength training, right? And you're getting back to lean muscle mass and you're recovering better in that because lean muscle mass, you're performing better, your aerobic age will decline. You improve your lean muscle mass, your VO2 max goes up, your relative VO2 max will go up. Like, you have improvements that will happen. They're related. These things are related, but measure them as compartments and focus on them.
So one thing, if you're doing this, and I think this is a great example and very relevant also to myself, but if you are going to go back and include, let's say, the lowest score is strength training, so you're going to go back and emphasize that in your routine. Don't be impatient, and you have to kind of remember that it takes time to adapt. And there's going to be, some ramp up time here where maybe you're not feeling like all of a sudden you're faster, or maybe your other rides that felt good feel less good now because you're adapting to the strength training. Um, Instead of giving up on that and going back to the internet and scrolling and looking for other new fancy protocols, and things that might help your aging problem, just commit to what you understand is what you need for improvement. So what, you as an individual, when you've done your scoring here, commit to improving those low scores versus doing what maybe you've been doing for the last couple of years, is questioning everything. Too many voices out there, listening to all the podcasts that are talking about the bell curve and listening to people who are trying to sell you something, right? There's all these quick fixes and pitches out there that can get very consuming, especially when you're at this point where you're like, well, something's changed. Now, I don't know how to get back to where I know I want to be, but it takes this commitment in these different compartments.
Well, good point. So let's talk about this. Like, okay, we hopefully everybody understands this compartmentalization of your training maturity and age, and you're starting to think a little bit different about the specificity of what I need and why I should react to that, because it's going to give you the best results towards your overarching goals of better performance, longevity, and quality of life. So is any one of these the ultimate non-negotiable? And how do I use Namrita's wisdom score as we get older and wiser? What's non-negotiable? I'm going to tell you the non-negotiable. The non-negotiable, you think I'm going to say recovery, is not it. It's important, but it's not it. It's consistency. This gets lost. We talk about this in general training. We talk about this, as a key driver of in training. But as we get older, consistency gets harder, but it is the secret. Like this concept of, like, we think about so hard about the performance. Like, think about the greatest achievements of your life. The day you stood on the podium, you won your big race, you completed. The moment you were crossing the finish line, you were hurting. Like you were digging deep. You were, oh gosh, this hurts so bad, but I can hold on, right? You tend to identify that feeling with success. As we get older, that's more of a trap. We hearken back to that. And there should be those moments. Embrace them, baby, and chase them. But it shouldn't be what defines quality in your training. Like, because that means every workout, we're so holding on to that. We're protecting that performance. And it's not the heroic workout that you can do once that will make you the better mature, the better masters athlete. It's the appropriate workouts that you can keep doing time and time again. The results will be better for a less sexy, a less hard, less no pain, no gain moment. Not that you don't need a fair amount of intensity. It's on the list. Remember, not, a balanced amount of intensity, but change your mindset to approach, because the goal isn't anymore, can you prove you can survive the hardest workout? Right? The goal is that allows you to build a program that you can keep absorbing the workouts that you do without creating inconsistencies. Go back to my strength training program. You load up the deadlift bar, you hurt your back, it puts you to 3 to 4 months out of training. That breaks all of the compartments, right? It breaks everything down. And when you're thinking about this concept of consistency, it's a double-edged sword. If you stay consistent, I don't care if you give up a little ride time and a little more gym time and you balance it out with an equality structured program, right? I don't care about that. That will increase your performance. It's more important that your consistency. Now, if you do things, your wisdom score isn't high, and you do things that injure yourself or take extended times off, there is no greater impact on your quality of life and longevity and I'll put it as the third bullet, your ability to perform, than extended periods of time off. Let's say 60 days or more. Like it might actually be 30. Like you don't want extended periods of time off. That's why it's so important that you're disciplined in this phase. You're implementing your compartments and your individualization with high guidance, with high expertise, because you can't afford to be wrong. You injure yourself in the gym and you're out for 90 to 120 days, you've negatively impacted all three of your longevity, your quality of life, and your performance. They'll all come down. That's the price we pay for being less wise, I guess. Nimrita is a way to say it. You need that wisdom score. I'm certainly adding that to 6 as my list.
Yeah, yeah, it's I think right, like going from 0 to 100 is not the answer. And this takes some, I think, sitting down and really reflecting, talking with a coach, talking with an expert, and having some objective guidance here, I think really also helps because I don't know, I think about, just sitting here and like scoring myself and then how would I come up with a plan where I'm not overthinking every little thing as me being a self-coached athlete. Like this is where expertise and guidance I think can really help. And something you said, we just can't afford to get it wrong now. I think, when you're younger, you can sort of figure things out and you're going to adapt and you're going to be very resilient. And despite some less conducive behaviors, but yeah, like you can't afford to just download any strength program off the internet now and like go for it. And, you know, I don't know. I think having that intelligent, that guidance to help put it all together is a huge benefit that, we
Mm.
can offer, that coaches can offer, and takes a lot of the questions out and develop that trust. And like you get to learn your own body again and move forward instead of like making those excuses over and over again.
So, if our first response lever, right, levers we can pull to protect and enhance for the mature athlete performance, longevity, and quality of life, consistency is lever number one. Here's a way to think about it. If you're out there and you're listening and you're self-coached athlete, you're writing your own trainer, write the perfect 4-week training cycle 6 months from today. Like, what would it look like 6 months from today? And don't be overly optimistic. Don't like put pie in the sky, which just a good quality. And then think about what do you need to do in the 5 months to get there that ensures you get there, because that will force you into a slightly longer thinking. Like, I'm not going to start tomorrow with 5 days of high intensity. And by the way, I'm going to go to the gym too every day that week. Like, build to that point if you're just starting out, or if you have a low training maturity and just getting started, build to points. Like, think the long term. It's like, um, riding a bike. It's like descending down a great descent. You're looking ahead where you're going. Don't look at the front wheel. That's how you get in trouble. You look at the next workout. Is it hard enough? Will it make me satisfied that I had my no pain, no gain approach on? Look 6 months down the road and be thinking like that's important. So that's lever one. To me, in order of importance, that's lever one. And these are my order. I'm not sure these are Nemrita. So sorry, Nemrita. Lever two is get in the gym. Strength training is no longer optional if you want those things. And there's probably, of these, not really any one single thing that can improve your quality of life and longevity than time in the gym under a good combined plan that's building strength, coordination, and stability and mobility, but they tend to blend all together. So you want a program that is doing that for you. Find the time. Any excuse you're making right now is shortening your life, your quality of life, and holding you back as a master's athlete, as a 50 plus athlete. Get in the gym. That's lever two. Agree? Disagree, Namrita?
I do. Yeah. It's not the most fun for me, but I do agree. Yeah.
I go
Oh,
through phases of loving the gym, and I do go through some phases like, all right, I'm done. But you got to have the discipline. I'll tell you, it's funny. I Namrita and I are going out to Laugh Gravel Worlds here in a little bit, and my training has been very off this year because we're too busy working. And I stopped strength training from. I returned from my Mallorca camp, and I didn't get back into strength training. I fell in the trap. And then I was like 2, 3 weeks ago, like, I need to get back to this. I'm so bad. But then I'm like, I'm so close to gravel worlds. I'm just going to create more fatigue. But I'm learning to pull back a little and say, okay, I might not absolutely perform on the bike, but I need to get back to the things that make me healthy because that'll allow me to be stronger in the fall, stronger next year. So I got back into the habit. I'm still dealing with the extra fatigue, but I started slow. I'm just blending it in. These are the type of decisions we make as the master ass. Sometimes we have to give a little short term gain for the longer term investment. And that's what you have to look at.
totally agree.
Now, lever number three, appropriate intensity. Like if we think about, what is, so when we talk about consistency, right, that's really protects the performing athlete. Like, because what you're protecting against is extended blocks of time off, and what you're protecting about is any over introduction of stimulus and overtraining and overly hard type of deal. When we think about strength, we're protecting the decline of muscular coordination. I would put strength actually under that, more important, but that means strength, balance, mobility all come underneath that coordination. And that has to be protected for quality of life, but particularly on a bike, it's not easy. And the final intensity that protects the ceiling. That keeps that VO2 max high. It keeps your maximal outputs high. Now, we tend to, even as younger athletes, misunderstand the relationship between dose and response. We tend to think we need a lot more dose and it only gives us a little response. That's because when we execute a lot more dose, we tend to get less adaptation. You need lower amounts of dosage to allow for the aging athlete adaptation to get a better adaptation. So you need intensity, and it absolutely needs to be built into your training program, your periodization, and everything like that. You need a little bit more than, I don't want to say that because you're going to mistake that as frequency. You need a little more focus on when and how to execute that intensity into your training modalities. Um, but you've got to commit to it. And for me, I will make this uh, honest confession. At 59, that's one of the areas I'm struggling the most with is mentally going out and doing the intensity because I've been riding a bike for about 30 years now, and that's a lot of pain and suffering. And there are days where I'm rolling out. I can go to the gym and lift weights and be tired, and that's okay. And I could ride my bike for a 4, 5, 6 hour day and be okay. But there's something about VO2 max intervals that's mentally getting a little harder. And I always have the same approach. I commit to it. I roll out for my 15, 20-minute workout, Rebecca's 20-minute roll, and then I do one. I just do one. Like once I get there, then I can execute. And what drives me to do that on my high intensity days? I know how important it is. Like I get it. That's probably the area where I have to invest the most mental energy in committing to it. So I do it, and that's what it takes. That's the first three levers, and those are important to talk about. Two more levers. One is more in your court, Namrita. You have to get smarter about your nutritional needs, your fueling needs, because it changes. It changes as we get older. Our macronutrient, our caloric demands, they're changing. So I think that's a lever. And I think we get more nutrition confused at this age of our life. I don't mean confused like we just don't know, but it's hard to figure out. Do you want to chat about that maybe?
Yeah. Well, especially if you look at, marketing to the general population
Yeah.
and you look around and what's available now, like anything and everything has protein in it. You know, you have protein water and protein crackers and protein cereal and yes, like having more protein as you age is important. Again, we have that anabolic resistance where, we maybe need a little bit more protein to have the same adaptive response um, in maintaining our lean mass and our structure for all these tissues that we're, not just muscle, but trying to maintain bone and other every cell in our body, basically. So yes, the needs are a little bit higher, but not crazy high, right? Like the emphasis I think is overly stated on protein for masters athletes and for aging athletes. And so if we think about, okay, we're not that different anymore. Our training is can be the same with some slight modifications and some refocusing. Our nutrition we also still need carbohydrates. And I think the biggest thing I see with aging athletes is they're now afraid of carbohydrates for maybe
Mhm.
health reasons and, reduce glycemic control and pre-diabetes and things like that. Or and they're like, well, I don't need 120 grams of carbs an hour. And that's, I see that over here in the endurance world. And then over here I see I need protein and everything. And so there's so many confusing messages. So ultimately, the timing and the specificity is what matters the most with your fueling. So, have your slightly higher protein, and that's still like 1.8 to 2 grams per kilogram per day spread across your meals. Have your recovery, protein intake, but don't neglect the carbs. And you need carbs during your training, especially in these higher intensity sessions. Even in your longer endurance days, you need some carbs. Time them so they're available to support your training and your recovery. So instead of, eating just blindly more carbs in your diet, be intentional about where you're putting them and right before, during, and right after your training. The rest of the day, yeah, focus on higher fiber intake, the more complex carbs and less sugars, because those are the ones that are going to impact also your health and longevity. So fueling has to be more intentional. It's just another one of those areas where we have less room for error. And it's not that it's completely different than it used to be, but the timing is so much more important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And the final lever, recovery architecture. We weren't going to ignore it because
Mhm.
this does impact. I don't want to say I've kind of tried to redefine it maybe a little bit for everybody, or just not being the check down solution, but it is one of the levers we need to consider as the masters athlete. Um, we need more recovery. Two ways. This is we need recovery. We need more recovery between hard workouts. Like one of my rules for masters riders is never more than two hard, and I wouldn't say never. Sometimes just pure schedule and whatever. There's never, never, right? But the 98% rule is no more than two hard days a week. And even that can be a stretch. One hard day a week can be enough stimuli. Like you have to understand. And here's why you're like, well, Tim, tell me, is it one or two? Go
Mhm.
back to the original point. It depends on your training maturity, how many years you've training, where are you at in that journey, how much investment did you make for retirement here. That I can't answer if it's one or two because I don't know what you were doing before. And that has to be felt, measured, observed by you, the athlete, or maybe you and your coach to find out what that right answer, because the answer the question you're asking yourself is not what I can execute. The question you're asking is what can I adapt to? And it's so important to understand those are two different things. I can execute a lot of stuff as an athlete. I wouldn't adapt to 80% of it. Like I can do more work than is good for me. I've been riding a bike for 30 years and training structurally for 25 of them. Um, but that's not as good for me just because I can do it. I don't adapt to it anymore because I'm mature, I'm older. Like, and that adaptation needs a little more wisdom and a little more recovery. So overarching, that's a simple thing. Just limit your intensity days and just ride your bike on the other days and enjoy some, let's call it zone two. Like call it vibe, call it aerobic, like call it what you want. You don't need more for performance at the days. More might actually be negatively impacting you. As a matter of fact, I would bet you it would be. If you want to ride more zone two. Like the intensity impact is much less. You're not doing the microtrauma to your muscles. You're not having the fueling. Well, you can sort of match it up, but it's different fueling demands, other stuff. It's less impactful. Second is how you execute intervals. And I've given this advice a fair amount, and it's learned and it's got some science base, but also it's just experience learned and with athletes learned. You need to reduce the time of your intervals and increase the time of your recovery in interval sets. So I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say you're used to doing 4-minute VO2 maxes or 3-minute VO2 maxes. Let's say you're doing 4-minute VO2 max with 4 minutes recovery. We'll use this as an example, a very classic 1-to-1 ratio of VO2 max. 4 minutes is a pretty good sweet spot of VO2 max. So it's a good example. As we age, as we get 50 plus or 60 plus, and again, I don't know what you've been doing, so just conceptualize this. I want to take that same 8-minute block and I want to go hard for 3 minutes and recover for 5. So now I'm doing 3 on, 5 off. Those are the adaptations. That's a concept. There's a lot more precision behind it than I can communicate in a podcast, but that's a recovery architecture of a workout you should think about because you want to protect the intensity. It's more important that you put out a couple more watts than extend that effort out for the extra minute because you're protecting the ceiling. So if you were like, man, when I do 4-minute intervals, they kill me now because that last minute is living hell. It's okay to do 3-minute intervals. You have my, and hopefully Nemrita's permission. Those are two impacts on your recovery architecture.
Yeah, this makes me think of too, when we were talking about intensity and then also this recovery architecture and, how to structure the rest of your rides and your easier aerobic rides. I know that group rides, let's talk about that real quick, are an important social aspect of riding for a lot of masters athletes. And you might think, oh, well, that's my intensity day. And what you said about being able to execute or keeping up on the fast group ride versus what can I adapt to? I mean, those are, again, two different things. So it's like, what do you want? And that intensity dose may not be what you need. Maybe it does feel good that you can keep up on it, but maybe it's not the same stimulus as your 6 by 3 minute VO2 max interval set.
Yeah. So and also understand you're balancing this with what you enjoy. So some simple guardrails can keep you enjoying what you enjoy. Like let's say in the end of the day, you want to do that fast group ride every Tuesday. Well, don't be like, okay, that's my aerobic day, and then I'm going to do VO2 max intervals, just like Tim and Namrita told me on Wednesday. Like, no, just count that as your hard day. If you're really, it's a different stimuli, it's a little different impact, or a lot of different impact, depends on the ride. But still, that's your hard day. No more than 2 hard days a week. You can still enjoy. We're not saying like turn your cycling life into some draconian event, but just put some guardrails around you as an aging athlete. All right, let's do this and then move into some conclusions. Let's summarize these key kind of points that we made. Point number one, pushback number one, age magnifies the athlete's history. Like this is the overarching target of everything. You have to evaluate you. My acute training age, last 18 months, my chronic training age, what was I doing? Was it reasonably quality? Look back. Everything we're talking about here lives under that. That's what breaks the bell curve. Like we all have such variations, we can't put a nice little tight cluster or a nice tight bell curve together on this. So age magnifies the athlete's history. The next part underneath that becomes then once you look at that, don't just blame aging. Look at what's changed. It could be your detraining, and as to the next point, detraining in specific areas. That detraining might be hurting your performance more than what you're blaming aging for. And I don't mean blaming like in a negative sense, accepting might be a better word. Then we talked about this idea of your training age has multiple dimensions. And they were, in case you didn't have your pencil out when I said this the first time, your aerobic age, your intensity age, your strength age, your technical age, and your recovery age. So, all right, you've looked at that. Those are all sort of diagnostic, are they not? Like you're thinking diagnostically, you're reflecting. And this is a challenge of self coaching, but it's teachable. And I'm trying to teach you a way to do it. Sit down for an honest hour and look through stuff and figure out that's what a coach would do first anyway. Like
Mhm.
you need to look through that stuff and rate your and score on that scale of 1 to 10 or whatever scale. Think about it in a diagnostic fashion. Don't make assumptions. It's just aging. Once you have the diagnostic, we're kind of giving you a prescription of non negotiable areas. So it's not a highly specific prescription, but it is a defined prescription, right? Prescription one, lever number one, be consistent. Build consistency into all of your thinking, all of your execution. Um, Lever two, prescription two, get in the gym. Strength training is vital at this stage for you to achieve goals of performance, longevity, and quality of life. We need to be in the gym. It is the number one way, in my opinion, you're countering some of the most negative impacts of aging. Lever three, prescription three, intensity protects the ceiling. You need appropriately dosed intensity, hard. You need to recover well, my recovery architecture, but you need that intensity. Lever four, you need to fuel smarter. You need to fuel for your age and what your body needs to maintain consistency, adaptation, all the important things that are happening. And the final lever we're talking about today is that recovery architecture. Notice it's on the bottom. That doesn't necessarily make it less important. I don't want to just universally have everybody thinking I'm older, I just need more recovery. Yes, it's part of it, but it has to live in a multifaceted approach of a diagnostic view of you as an aging athlete, an honest breakdown of what might be the causes, an honest compartmentalization. Then these levers work on their own. If you put that concept together and you think about what Namrita and I are talking about, you might and might not see yourself and as a master's athlete in a different light and think about things differently. The value I see for so many athletes, and a coach will take an athlete through this, or athletes go through it, it is this evaluation process, the qualities in the journey.
Mhm.
It's not just me saying, here's your training plan or do intensity on Tuesday.
Mhm.
It's the self analysis, it's the diagnostics, it's the compartmentalization, it's an honest view of self. And then once you understand that diagnostic, that needs, then I understand the key levers, like the key areas that I can execute an improved process on. And consistency is important and all the things we're talking about. Then I can be honest about the best training for me as a master's athlete.
Mhm. I love what you said earlier about, write down the ideal training block, 5 or 6 months from now, and then do the things to, on-ramp yourself to get there versus like trying to do everything immediately different and perfect right now. Um, I think that ramp, it doesn't have to be super slow, but I think the better you do with the integration of supporting the new training, whether it's the new intensity dose, the better recovery, better sleep, um, strength training, supporting all of that with fueling, I think, is so important and something that gets shuffled down in on the list of things that are important for athletes, but it's not, and it's what's going to help gel it all together for you. So I think what's what's kind of like the main outcome we want here? I mean, I would say I hope 50 plus, 60 plus athletes listen to this and realize that they can improve. And maybe that takes thinking about it just differently than what you've been doing. But there's leaning in on individualization and you as an athlete, you and your training age and your history and your goals. What do you want to get out of it? And then really focusing on those key areas can actually yield some real change. And it just takes thinking about it differently and being honest.
I think the takeaway, and this is great, we can close on these takeaways. So I think it would be nice because I know I ran long today, but I'm good at that. The uh, To me, the takeaway, what I hope the audience will take away is one, a different way to conceptualize training as a master. Like, let's just break the bell curve and not just live within that. And I think the key message is we tend to think as we get older, we get more like it's simpler. We're just older, we're slowing down because that's not true. Your real need is more individualization. And I hope conceptually we've given you a way of better understanding you and compartmentalizing you and your training age and your performance, all these things. We've given you a way of being more diagnostic of you. You might have started listening saying, oh, Tim and Namrita are going to give me 3 or 4 secret workouts. And that hasn't happened. That's not the takeaway. It's a deeper insight into how we conceptualize ourselves as masters athletes, as aging athletes, and as just aging humans, and how we will do and how we want to live out the rest of our lives. I think that's an important takeaway. Then understanding the 5 levers, our opinion, there's more, maybe there's less, but understanding our 5 core levers of where you can really impact the performance metrics, as we get 50 plus. I think, I summarized those, so I won't summarize them again, but that's like your key takeaways. A good overview of what it's like to be an aging athlete, an individualized view, understanding that your differences are getting higher, a way to execute a unique compartmentalized diagnostic, and then some levers you can pull to make a better training, make a better you.
Mm. I think it's awesome. I really appreciate the perspective and, the difference in how we're spinning training as you get older. So thanks for that. And thanks everyone for listening. For more coaching content and information on all our coaching programs, including our expert guided one-on-one coaching, visit us at joinbasecamp.com. Our mission is to empower and educate you, the athlete, and to provide a training and learning community for the seasoned racer and newer rider alike. Finally, if you like this content, we really appreciate you leaving a review and rating for the podcast wherever you listen. And thanks again. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.